May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio Podcast. I'm DC Poopa of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want, within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today I am going to read to you I'm going to read you a letter that Ken Berman sent me, oh God, a long time ago. It's not dated. Oh, here I says. I talk about that in the preamble. So, yeah. So let me just read that. All right. So here we go. Ken Berman. Maybe this is a letter Ken sent. He doesn't do email. Yeah, I think it was a letter. Not dated. Maybe it was like 2001. I think Dennis Sampson suggested I get hold of his old Dharma friend, Ken. Ken, well, he was my Dharma friend too, but Dennis was very close to him. Ken was one of the youngest males to go through Tongariro and practice steadily at Tassar. I think he was maybe 15 when he started, but maybe 16 or 17? No, he was really young. I don't think 17. Leland Smithson might have started at 16 also. Yeah, but now I saw young women, teenage girls practice with us, or even 12, 13. That was more normal, 15, 16. Males, less normal. My son Clay, he was working in the kitchen. Well, both my sons. Kelly spent a lot of time at Tassar growing up. And Kelly always worked in the kitchen and everything, but he didn't go to services and zazen and stuff that I can remember. He was a very good worker. Clay, who's much younger than Kelly, Kelly was born in 73 at Green Gulch. Clay was born in 91 in Japan. Daya Goldschlag, Daya was Kelly's mother, and Elin, formerly Schweiger, then Chadwick, now Powers, was Clay's mother. So Clay worked very young, just like Kelly, in the kitchen, and with knives and cutting, which had sometimes people would say, "Well, you can't. You're too young to use a knife," and then they had to be told, "Well, actually, he knows how to use a knife." But Clay would go to the Zindo, and Clay would go to services, and Clay wanted to be at every work meeting and stuff like that. Clay and I would do skits at the work meetings. But anyway, so Clay did quite young. So I don't know. Anyway, that just comes to mind. So here, I'm going to read you Ken Berman. I visited Ken he lived way up in northern California, and he used to be a lot younger than me, right? So maybe he might be like 8-10 years younger than me. Anyway, God, I'd like to talk to him now. No, well, I'll try. But anyway, this is from a long time ago. So Ken wrote, I remember Suzuki Roshi's being a very kind and gentle man. I think you would say he was glowing, very glowing energy. He seemed like the old sages of Asia, China, Japan, or India. he had that energy, especially of a Taoist sage of China. He had that kind of energy. He was playful, warm. You could feel very intimate with him. He was very open to what was happening with American students and how he related to them. I remember one time after a session, probably a 7-day session or a 5-day session. We didn't have 5-day sessions at Tassajara that I remember. We had 7-day. Just hugging him. Just going up and hugging him after the session. He was really excited, and he wasn't afraid to show that. It was great. That's it. I never heard of anybody doing that. Pretty cool, Ken. I remember he was very playful. I was at Tassajara in '69. I remember him coming down the path. There was a wooden statue of Hote. I think his fingers were broken off, but he was there. He has his hands up in the air like he was laughing. Suzuki Roshi came down the path and did a great imitation of Hote, holding his hands up just to show me he could do it. It was fun to see him do the same poses as the statue. I remember going to many lectures. I think he was a funny guy. It didn't really hit my funny bone as much. I mean, I went there, and a lot of times other people were laughing, but I remember not laughing when everybody else was laughing. I laughed a lot more at Katagiri Roshi than I did at Suzuki Roshi, but he did like to play around as well as being really serious. I do remember one time, this was at Tassajara in '69. It was an evening lecture. This guy, Bob Halpern, was there. In those days, there were really some far-out people at Tassajara. It just amazes me the characters we had. One of them was Bob Halpern, who is now named Mipam and is with Trungpa. A lot of the old Suzuki students left Zen Center after Suzuki Roshi died to study with Trungpa. Anyway, Bob Halpern was a real character, a strong guy. He did all kinds of things. I was 17 at the time, so he was kind of an image for me. He was the kind of, like my ideal of a male image in some ways. He was crazy. He was an exhibitionist and a wild guy. That's true. That's true, Ken. I've never heard anybody say it that way, but that's right. Hey, Bob, I hope you're listening to this. In a lecture, Suzuki Roshi said, "You can do anything you want." Something like, "You are a Zen master. You can do anything you want." Bob Halpern says, "Really? You mean I can go right into the kitchen and eat some bread?" Suzuki Roshi says, "Yes, you can." So Bob Halpern jumps up from his seat and runs into the kitchen, which right at that time was a really big deal, and came back with a big mouthful of bread. Suzuki Roshi laughed and laughed. He really enjoyed that kind of open contact. At the end of the lecture, he said, "Thank you very much." He really felt the practice was alive with Bob just going into the kitchen and eating bread. That was one of my fondest memories. I remember another time back in '69, Suzuki Roshi was around a lot, him and Kobun Chino. I was also at Tassajara in '71 and '72, but I don't think Suzuki Roshi was there. He might have been. It's all pretty hazy for me now. Well, just to remind you, Ken, '71, Suzuki, Tatsugami did the spring practice period. Suzuki came down for he was there during the summer guest season. He'd had a gallbladder operation in the spring. So he was there a little in the spring after his operation, after he'd healed from that. And then came back for 2 months, 6 weeks, and then he left, and that was it. He had cancer, and he died in December. 72, no, he died December of '71. So now Ken says, I think this was in '69. Anyway, we were all having a meeting in the guest dining room, which was one of the few warm places there. We all sat down, and Suzuki Roshi started talking about his past in Japan. I remember the kerosene lamps and how intimate it was. It was like secrets. What was your teacher's real past? What was it like for him living in Japan? What was he like when he grew up? Here we were in this very intimate setting, and he was really giving out the jewels of his life. In a way, what it was like in Japan. He talked a lot about, there must be a 300-page street recording of this. I recommend somebody listen to it. Try to find this recording of Suzuki Roshi. I'm almost sure it was recorded. It should have been. Nah, we wouldn't record things in the dining room. Not that I know it. We've got plenty on his past in Japan. But I don't think that was recorded. Now you talk about it, I wish it had been. But he might have just gone over the same things he said at other times. I would think so. He didn't talk about the tragedies or any of that. He told about his teacher, who was very tough. Ken's talking about Gyokujun Soen, his master. He called Soen his master, and he called Kishizawa his teacher. Sometimes he'd say, call Soen teacher too, but generally he tried to distinguish. A lot of his students left, and Suzuki was one of the few who stayed. Yes, that's true. In fact, at one point, Suzuki was the only one who stayed. And I think in the dining room at that time, I was there. But I'm not saying. But anyway, I know how he talked about that. He said that at one point he was the only one who hadn't left. But and they were kids, so their parents had taken them out. It was just too hard. Someone was too hard on them. And maybe they just wanted their kids to be in there for a certain length of time or whatever. But Suzuki, the way he told it was that he'd stuck it out and these others left because it was too hard. And he said they were smart enough to know how to leave, and he wasn't. And the way he would describe it is he was the slow horse, the slow learner. And the others were smarter than him, but because he was the crooked cucumber, is what he would say. Because he was, not as smart as them, a little bit of a crooked cucumber. He stayed, and he said, that turned out to be to his advantage. He'd say, that's my weakness. And because of my weakness, it turned out to be, I stayed, and it turned out to be an advantage. That sort of thing he'd say about that story. But that was just one period of his practice. And, Soen had other students at other times, especially, older ones that, became priests. And, well, the younger ones might have been ordained and become priests, but the older ones say go on and, become priests with temples and stuff. There were a few anyway. So he told about his teacher, who was very tough. I'm going to say master. He told about his master, who was very tough. A lot of his students left, and he was one of the few who stayed. No, he was the only one in the end who stayed. Once he climbed up to a canned fruit. It was on a very, no, it wasn't a canned fruit, it was a cake. That was on a very, no. It was something, I'm right, I can't remember. It was neither cake or canned fruit. That was on a very top shelf. And him getting on the shoulders of somebody else. Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 kids, and they were helping each other get up to the top. This is in Crooked Cucumber. And Ken says, and falling down and burning himself on the stove. Oh, really? Really? I don't know that one. All right, he told about minor petty theft or whatever. Yeah, they steal food. His teacher said if you're going to steal something, then you should share it with your friends. It was important to share. That's right. He said if somebody, like he was talking about a persimmon, I think, that was ripening, and somebody had taken it and eaten it and not shared it. So someone got really mad at that. But if they stole things and shared them, food, he sort of would scold them, but he understood. Another memory is before World War II, he worked for this English woman, Mrs. Ransom. I think her name was, that's right. He cleaned her house, and I think he lived in an apartment. No, he lived in her house with her. She was his English teacher at Komasawa University. He went to school. Yeah. He was really into coffee. He went to some American-style cafe, and he was really into drinking coffee. He was studying English. Mrs. Ransom had a Buddha, and all her European guests would come and visit her, and he would use the palms of the Buddha, and they would use the palms of the Buddha as an ashtray. He cleaned them out, but he wouldn't say anything. That's true. Good memory, Ken. But he put an end to that finally. Miss Ransom came around to understand why he respected the Buddha. And that marked a big turning point in Suzuki's life, to see her go from ridiculing him for making offerings to the Buddha to finally, after what he called, that was the Cold War, this long period where he'd make offerings to it and incense. And she'd go, God, she and her friends would ridicule him. And finally, one day it was like raining or something, and she asked him, please, can you explain why you do seem to be a smart young man or boy, but how can you worship that Buddha? And then he explained what the Buddha represented. It wasn't some object. It was his own Buddha nature that the Buddha was reflecting, or something like that. I don't know what he said, but that's a tough one. People say, well, they're worshiping graven images, and I've seen people say that, and I said, no, I'm not worshiping graven image. Well, you're bowing down to this graven image. But, well, it's a practice to stop bowing down to ourselves. And we're not really bowing to the Buddha. We're learning actually not to bow down to anything. Like Suzuki said, the most important thing to believe is nothing. Believe in nothing. But I can see that's hard for people to understand. It's sort of thing like, when I came to Zen Center, I see people bowing and there's statues and stuff, and I go, oh, well, I like the meditation, but this bowing stuff. But then later, I just saw it as a physical act. And, after sitting, it was great to stand up and bow and chant and do something physical. And you're not really thinking anything. You're just doing it. It's just physical things. It's more, it's closer to saying, to being a dancer. I mean, do you ask the dancers why they dance these movements? It's closer to that. So anyway, here we go. He used to sneak out of the house. He means her house. You can just lift up Japanese doors and sneak out underneath them. You didn't have to slide them if they were locked. Yeah. He said that if Mrs. Ransom ever knew, she'd get really insecure or afraid because she thought they were completely locked. He'd sneak out at night and go run around, I guess. I don't remember that. I've forgotten all about that. That's good, Ken. Thanks for reminding me of that. Mrs. Ransom went back to England, I guess. I think she started some kind of Zen center, meditation center when she went back there. No, Ken, she did not. She started going to her Quaker church again. I have been to Miss Ransom's Quaker church and attended it with Graham Petchy, who did start a sitting group in London a year he was there and spent time with her, and she told him a great deal about her experience with Shunryu Suzuki. But she did come to practice Zazen, visit Eiheiji, actually meditate there, and do tea ceremony and things like that, and came to respect Buddhism. But she didn't stop being a Quaker. You know, that the talk at Zen Center, you know, when you hear people talk about Miss Ransom, and Peter Schneider did his very useful interviews with Suzuki about his life, you know, you get the impression she was his first convert. Not so cut and dried. Because of his relationship with her, and especially through the sort of vehicle of the Buddha, she came to respect Buddhism, to respect his practice, and realize it was something that she is a Quaker, and they cannot stand literal representations of God, just like Muslims, right? And the Quakers, you know, they're into meditation, and they don't like, you know, overly literal interpretation. So once she was able to understand these practices, meditation and things like tea ceremony and flower arrangement, and, you know, just the way a monk's life was, and that once she came to understand it, she could participate in it, and she could appreciate it, but she didn't stop being a Quaker. And also, she always revered her relationship with the Wan Yung, the wife of the last emperor of China. Oh, God, I forget his name right now. And she taught both of them English. She wasn't the number one teacher of him. He had a very famous English teacher, but she did teach him English, and especially had a very close relationship with his the wife that was closest to him. I'm not going to go look at the details. They're in Crooked Cucumber, and they're on Wikipedia. But when Miss Ransom died in the town in England where she lived, you know, it's on here in her section, she died with a portrait of Wan Chung in her hands. So, you know, people, you know, students of Suzuki Roshi would have wanted to think she died with a picture of him, but to her, he was just a young student of hers, you know, and a houseboy, and somebody who she learned a lot from, and he learned a lot from her. And because of his relationship with her, he came to realize that Westerners could study and learn Buddhism, and that's his first experience of beginner's mind. Was not beginner's mind in others, in a student. Was with her, and he could see, wow, she doesn't have all these assumptions that Japanese people have. Let me give you something to an analogy there. It drives me crazy the way so many people talk about religion. People I know that are friends on Facebook, in the media, they're so, you know, people who are like against religion, people that are atheists or agnostics. I always liked the atheists and agnostics best in school because I was raised in a home where the word God stood for mind, for a big mind, just like what Suzuki taught. And there was no idea of there being a being that the word God represented. So that's what I grew up with. But most people grew up with the idea that the word God stood for a being who was very much like a person and magically created the universe. And, some of them, believe all the myth literally. So the way people talk about it, either it's just completely dominated by people who literally believe all this and that there's a being who's like a human being named God that made this, or they don't believe that, right? And the ones who don't believe it, they don't think there's anything else not to believe, it seems. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just constantly all this stuff saying, well, if Jesus was the Son of God and then he was killed, and then God killed his own son, just always, all their anti-religion stuff is just making fun of the myth as a literal truth, right? So they're stuck. They can't see the depth in Christianity. They can't see it's just another mythic system to understand emptiness and fundamental reality, right? So I think that's how Suzuki felt about Buddhism in Japan, that people had such rigid set ideas, so many of them on what the word Buddha meant and what, what Buddhism was, that he felt it would be very hard to get through to them what it was really all about. But then he meets a Westerner who doesn't have all those assumptions, and he can get through to her much easier than he can to his own fellow countrymen. I mean, he's got plenty of monk friends who share the general understanding, but not the sort of people he'd want to teach, And so what he experienced as a priest is really just having to do memorial services and funerals, and they don't do Buddhist priests don't tend to do marriages there. That's Shinto, and just like it wasn't rewarding to him. He wanted to have students and deal with people who wanted to wake up to fundamental reality, to real fundamentalism. So he had this experience with Miss Ransom that really inspired him, and he did, give up. His teacher, his masters, told him he couldn't go to America. He couldn't go anywhere. He had to stay right there. And so he gave up his idea of going. But later, when he thought it was dead, it arose again. He got the opportunity. He went to America, and then he blossomed. It's not like he was this great enlightened being, to me, this is the way I see it, who came to America and enlightened other people. He was a dissatisfied priest, felt like his life was going nowhere, and got this opportunity to go to America and found the Americans there to inspire him. And he blossomed there, and he helped some others blossom. He found it was harder than he thought it would be. I mean, he was like really encouraged by the beginner's mind thing. But we lose our beginner's mind after a while. All right. So anyway, I like this thing where Ken says he'd sneak out of the house. I've got to copy and paste that into, I did not remember that. I'm going to put that in Crooked Cucumber. Hey, there's I just did the audiobook for Crooked Cucumber last year, and it came out in November. Audible published by Shambhala. And in the course of making it, it created, it's a second edition. It's not, they don't say it's a second edition, because if they did, it couldn't be paired with the book and just be listed right alongside the book. There's the book, the Kindle, the audio book. See, the book and the Kindle, they're published by Penguin Random House. Another, what do they call it? Imprint under them. There's Harmony Books, there's Crown. I don't know. It just changes, They're just like, publishing's like just one monster with different tentacles now. But the audiobook is Shambhala, and it's really second edition. And all the changes, if you go to, cuke.com/CC21, the whole second edition is there. You can see what all the changes were, and lots of things and notes on the book. I'm going to put that there as one of the notes, or one of the editions. I'm continually work on that section. That's really good, some of this stuff from this. All right, so here we go. I'm going to continue with Ken's letter, which I'm commenting on it more than what I'm reading from his letter. He said Suzuki Roshi lost touch with her, stopped writing her. He said it was a real regret of his life that he stopped writing her and lost touch. No, that's not what happened. She wrote him, and he did not answer her. He had Yvonne, his secretary, answer her. And, Graham Petchy was over there with her. And she was just so upset that this person she'd been so close to for a few years in Japan had his secretary write. She wrote another letter, said, "Don't you dare have your secretary write me. You write me. I don't care how bad your English is." And he didn't write back. And then, there's this whole thing Suzuki would say, "Oh, we don't have to say anything, we know." And then he'd say, "She and I understood each other without doing it." Bullshit. That was terrible. And Graham was so extremely upset about it. He said, what sort of manners do you have? How could you do that? She wrote you and you don't write back? And to me, Suzuki's great sins are sins of omission, where he didn't explain, he didn't say anything, where he thought things would work out. But also that was his strength. I mean, it's amazing what happened around him with how little he actually said or did. So there's a positive side to that, and there's a negative side. And the negative side was it was very upsetting to her, and he felt very bad about it when she died. He realized he should have written her back. But we all have regrets. I know I have regrets. My son Clay has experienced visiting older people that are sick with me. And somebody died, and he told me he was sorry. He hadn't gone with me. He hadn't seen them the last time. He felt bad about it. And I said, "Clay, get used to it. You can only do so much, and you're going to feel bad that you didn't come through with somebody, you didn't see them that last time, or you didn't visit them enough, or whatever. You're going to experience that all your life, or that, your relationship with this person, you weren't kind enough, or whatever. So you have to forgive yourself, and just do your best." So really, it's hard for me, Graham was just so upset, and he went and he talked to Suzuki about it at Tassajara, and Suzuki said, "Well, I thought maybe she might want to write a book about me or something, or about those times," and she was asking about dates and things, and Graham was just livid. he said she wouldn't have written a book about you. She would have written a book about the last emperor of China and his wife. And she didn't do that. I mean, she was interviewed on BBC, but I think, but she didn't do that. She just wanted to write with you. And Graham was just so upset and went out. He said, I'm going to go work. And then later, Suzuki's Jisha came and said he would like to speak to you again. And Graham said, I'm working here. I'm not going to leave this job. And he said he and Suzuki never talked about that again, but they did talk. But Graham was only visiting for a while then. He was on his way back to Japan. All right, so Ken says, I'll go on to another story. This must be around 1970-71. Suzuki Roshi and Katagiri Roshi were both doing sesshin. At that time, I was a young hippie and constantly knocking middle-class values, which I considered were TV and TV dinners. Certain aspects of carpets, wall-to-wall carpets, whatever. Anyway, that's what I grew up in. I was at the sesshin, either a 7-day or a 5-day. I went in for an interview with Suzuki Roshi upstairs in his apartment. His apartment was very nice, comfortable, and very plush. It had a real thick piled white carpet and a TV in the corner. For some reason, it really put me uptight that Suzuki Roshi had this really nice, fancy room. What kind of Zen practice is this? I had my cold linoleum floor downstairs in 300 page where we were sitting. This put me really uptight. My mind was just churning about how could this guy live in all this luxury, etc., etc. My mind was going round and round, and I got more and more uptight. The interview was over, and I left and went downstairs. My mind was still going round and round. How could Suzuki Roshi live in all this luxury? What kind of teacher was he? I had an interview the next day with Katagiri Roshi. I was still fuming. I even told Katagiri Roshi. He couldn't figure out what I was talking about. I said, you should live with us. What kind of practice is this? Suzuki Roshi has a TV set. It really pushed my buttons, but somehow I worked through it during this sesshin. I really got a lot out of sesshin. I remember somehow realizing it was my own trip. I think the drama, the incredible doubt about Suzuki Roshi and the practice at Zen Center really helped my sesshin out. It was a big hump, an iron mountain I had to get through. I learned a lot from that sesshin. This is really, to me, an interesting story because you see there's nothing coming from Suzuki or Katagiri. It's all happening to him because he's sitting. And that's what practice is. It's not... we talk about Suzuki and Katagiri all the time and everything, but our awakenings and our little living triumphs and, epiphanies, they come, the teachers help us. They help create an environment that is encouraging, and they give us hints, but these things we do ourselves. We have the wisdom. The wisdom, the great teacher is us, our own mind. All right, now so Ken says, this is around 1970. Suzuki Roshi hadn't been to Japan for 4 or 5 years. All right, 1970, came to America in 59. He went to Japan in 63. He went to Japan in 66. And, 66. And then 1970, so it had been 4 years. He took a trip back to Japan, and he came back. He went there in like August, he came back. And the end of December, he wanted to come back for New Year's, Then he went around to all the Zen centers to renew contact with them. At that time, I was living in Mill Valley and going to the Mill Valley Zendo with Bill Kwong. We used to have Wednesday morning breakfast with Jaksho Kwong. Suzuki Roshi came to him. He came and sat with us at Altamont Hall. It was a collapsible Zindo, so you had to get up around 4:30. Collapsible. Well, the Altamont Recreation Center was a sturdy building. But they had all their cushions and everything, like in a closet or something, and they'd bring it all out for their zazen. It was one of the activities that happened in that building. Went on for years. Suzuki Roshi came to one. He came to us. Yeah, it was a collapsible Zindo, so you had to get up at around 4:30. One person did. I did it for a number of months, and bring out all the zafus and zabatans and the altar and screen, everything from this box in the corner of the community hall. I wonder if that box is still there at Altamont Hall. You set up the Zindo. Suzuki Roshi was there. We had this guy, Pat McFarland from Arkansas. He was a commercial artist. I considered him a cross between Emmett Kelly and Snuffy Smith. He was a real character. He's back in Arkansas now. He talked with an Arkansas drawl. Pat is married to Deborah Madison, and they've been living in Santa Fe for many years. All right. He was a real character. He talked with an Arkansas drawl. He was a really wonderful artist, too. Yeah. Pat has a gallery in Santa Fe, and it's been very successful. Pat was there doing the mokugyo, the wooden drum. He had this really funky style. He'd be hitting the mokugyo, and his head would be bobbing up and down. His whole body would be moving, as you'd imagine Snuffy Smith would be doing. He'd be bobbing up and down, totally funky. At the end of service after Zazen, Suzuki Roshi said to Pat, "I really like your style at the mokugyo." Pat goes, "Yes, it's Southern style." That's great. We usually had breakfast at Jaksho Kwong's place with Laura. That's Bill Kwong's wife. We had breakfast with Suzuki Roshi. Afterwards, he started talking to us. We were just sitting around informally in the living room. He was real upset with the way things were in Japan. He thought they were disgusting. He thought the politics were disgusting. The environment was getting totally screwed up. What people were doing with their lives. I think he was glad to be back in the United States, although he could see it coming from the United States also. I guess he gave this talk actually at Altamont Hall. It was a revolutionary talk. We didn't have a tape of that one. I remember him really being inspired and struck by his trip to Japan. He said we should sit and spread the Dharma, more sitting. There was almost an evangelical feel to his talk, which I'd never heard before. It was certainly different from anything I'd ever heard. What I remember about that talk at Altamont Hall was that we should spread sitting more. After breakfast at Bill and Laura's house, he talked a lot about how disgusted he was with Japan. He was very idealistic. He talked about how we should move away from the city, stay away from politics, plant trees, grow something. He had this real vision of what went wrong in Japan, and he really wanted us to stay away from it. All those things sounded great to me. I was a 19-year-old boy. I remember not looking at him, just looking at the floor and listening to him go through all these things he wanted to do, which I thought were just right in line with all my hippie philosophy of living in the woods or living in the country, growing things, staying away from politics, not polluting things, just practicing. And that was his idea. Then I looked up and realized here was this 65-year-old or whatever age he was, man, telling me to go live in the country and stay away from politics. I was amazed that this guy, this old Japanese man, was telling me exactly how I felt about things, telling all of us. It was inspiring to have a teacher who had a similar mind himself, but was older and from a different background. I got a lot out of his lecture and his idealism. Oh, that's really interesting. I'd forgotten all about it. I haven't read this letter in years and years. You know, he did give a talk in the city at the same time along those lines, but actually, Ken's going into more detail. Um, it's you know, especially he was upset about environmental destruction in Japan. You know, I can tell you one thing. He went back to Rinso-in and the creek that, now this is my assumption, because I know at some point that, you know how the Army Corps of Engineers in America have built tons of dams and done all sorts of stuff like that. And Fort Worth, Texas, where I grew up, there was a near our house. There was in both houses I grew up in, there was like a river, and in the second one, we go down and go enter into a ranch, and this was in the center of town. We'd enter into a ranch. There was this big ranch. Well, it wasn't quite the center, you know. It was, but the edge of town was really beyond it. God, the Edwards Ranch, I think it was called. And we go in there and walk over to the river, and there was a place or a bend in the river, and we had a rope swing, and we you know, there was a high place, like it wasn't just flat ground, you know. We'd swing out and drop into, you know, there was like a little lake in the river. There were water moccasins over on the edge, and there was like turtles. You were worried they were going to snap at you, but they'd leave us alone. We'd go swimming and everything. And then for flood control, all of that was straightened, and, you know, cement and, you know, sides that were 45 degrees so that they don't, you know, deteriorate. So it was all destroyed as far as having fun. I mean, we had a great swimming hole. So I've experienced that where I came from. And Suzuki, I think, experienced that when he went back and saw that the creek that ran by his temple it had been cemented. It had cement sides. And man, I want to tell you, you think the Army Corps, if you know anything about what the Army Corps of Engineers have done in America, I mean, you know, that's nothing compared to what Japan has done. Japan has used 30 times per capita the cement that America has. They are nuts using cement. There's so much of their coastline they've screwed up. They put like, you know, for to stop erosion, you know, to stop the ocean from taking away precious land or anything. They have all these, I forget what they're called. They're like giant stars and different what would you say, configurations. Like, you know, the game Jacks, you've got these little stars, you know, you throw them and like that, but they're giant, like 6 feet tall or something, just all sorts of them out there. There's all, I thought of making a coffee book with those things because they have different styles and forms, and there's just so much cement there. You know, in Fukushima, where that tsunami came in and killed all those people and got in the Fukushima reactor, you know, their solution, instead of putting things up higher, was to build like a 60-foot cement wall so people can't see the ocean. And, you know, before Fukushima, you know, there's old stones in the hillside there that say, do not build below this. You know, stones from like hundreds of years ago. Do not build below this, you know, because tidal waves happen, but they don't happen very often. And progress is so fast these days, and our memories are so poor because, you know, we don't have the longer memories that go further back because we don't, you know, have oral transmission so much. And so the solution is just more cement. So I think that's the sort of thing he experienced, was the incredible amount of cement and other things in the environment. And, you know, he'd grown up, you know, in a country that had such high regard for nature and for living with nature. Same thing here in Indonesia. You know, there's a whole thing here in Bali about balance with nature and living with nature. And, you know, the actual practices that are going on a bigger scale with pesticides and, you know, coal plants and different things are not in tune with that. So I think that sort of thing Suzuki experienced in Japan, and he was very interested in environmentalism, but you know, I mean, he just said some things, but he was very supportive of people that were interested in working for peace and for the environment. But it was up to each person to do that, not him. And you know, one thing he said though back then, he said, you know, here making a little emptiness point. But if the whole world is destroyed, nothing will have happened. So I think it's good to keep that in mind, because we're destroying ourselves and our civilization with climate change. I don't think, I think it's too late. I think we're doing it. You know, they keep saying, oh, the window's closed. I think the window's closed. But we'll see. I mean, we don't really know. We'll see what happens. But, you know, it's true. I mean, I see us as part of an endless, it's like an endless dream. And the dream is not going to stop. But, you know, at the level of this earth, which is what we should be taking care of and thinking of, and not, you know, trying to save the universe or anything, or on the level of this earth, I think the human race is failing. And I don't see any indication of us turning it around. So I think it's good to keep in mind that if it's all destroyed, nothing will have happened. We will not be injured. We will, our entire planet might die. And, you know, like George Carlin said, save the planet's fine, it's us that are screwed. Well, actually, the whole biosphere is in great, great danger. And not just human beings. And he, you know, like Jerry Brown said, you know, vertebrates are threatened. Anyway, so I think we do everything we possibly can to pull us out of this headlong rush to suicide, to planetary suicide. But keep in mind that no matter what happens, we're okay. It's all okay. That's a higher reality. But like Nagarjuna said, you know, to use emptiness as an excuse for dealing with form, it's better never to have heard of it. All right, so Ken said, there was another time, probably at Tassar in 69, I went in for an interview at Doksan with Suzuki Roshi. I bowed to the floor and was getting up, and he said, when you raise your hands, when you bow, it's like lifting Buddha's feet. Don't raise them very high. Raise them just to your ears, and then put them down. Don't raise them way up high. He told me to start over and over again and do it. No, he told me to start over again and do it. So I bowed to him. He put either his hands or his feet into my palms. It felt like his feet, but I don't know how he could get his feet out of his robes that fast and put them back in again. So it must have been his hands, but I always thought of them as his feet. I remember lifting up and feeling the weight of his hands or feet in my hands and putting them down. and getting that sense of gratitude of what real bowing was about. And from then on, I've always made sure not to raise my hands too high, although I see people raising their hands high. One time when I was at Tassara 69, I was sleeping. I heard his voice say, "Don't make Doksan a long one." So I didn't. I had always wanted it to be drawn out because I wanted to be around Suzuki, and I'm sure he was tired of all the students. So I made a short one. I was telling somebody about this many years later. I guess he'd been sending messages. Wow. And then Ken says, I remember, boy, it's got a lot of memories here, huh? I remember the fall of 71. We were driving out of Tassara to see the mountain seat ceremony with Dick Baker. It was fall. Yeah, I took that ride. And all the leaves were orange. It was beautiful at Tassara. We drove out to the city for the ceremony. I remember Suzuki Roshi coming in. He was jaundiced, very yellow, I guess from hepatitis. Nope, Ken, it was from cancer that was in the liver and made him jaundiced. And walking very slowly. I remember Hoitsu, his son. I guess Yvonne ran and somebody else, I can't remember who, but they were helping him to the mountain seat. That was his wife, Mitsu, and Hoitsu. He stood there with a staff, really close to death. Death was on his face, very intense, very strong image. I remember him doing the ceremony with Baker Roshi. Just before he left, he looked at us all. And with one of the most incredible, it was one of the most incredible feelings I've ever had. He hit his staff. He had a lot of energy, but he couldn't manifest it in his body. He hit his staff 3 times. It went making a shushy sound like that. Then he walked out. They took him out. We all bowed and cried as Suzuki Roshi left. It was so sad. What a strong feeling. That is one of the strongest memories from the most people. Maybe that's the strongest memory of Shunryu Suzuki that I've heard from the most people. When he rattled that staff. And I noticed this the second time where there's something like it says, making a shushy sound. So this is an interview with Ken that I taped. It's not a letter. All right, Ken says, we went back to Tassara for Rohatsu Sesshin, then him dying. For me, well, there was a period between the two. That ceremony was just like 11 days or something before Suzuki died. So, yeah, Rohatsu Sesshin was December 1st at Tassara, and he died on the 4th. So Ken says, I'm going to read that again. We went back to Tassara for Rohatsu Sesshin, then him dying. For me, the strongest part was that mountain seat ceremony. There are lots of other stories. I don't remember so much anymore. But I remember a lot of stories about Suzuki Roshi because there were so many far-out people in the early days of Zen Center. It was storytelling time all the time. I'll go through a few that I might not have anything to do with firsthand, but are great stories. John Coonan was Sokoji around 68. He was going with a woman named Gloria, who is now married to Paul Disco. Yes, well, they were married. John and Gloria were married. John told me about his wedding, how he and Gloria were at Sokoji. Suzuki Roshi said, hey, you guys should get married. He performed the service right on the spot. Oh, that's far out. They went in, Suzuki Roshi hit the Mokugyo, did the Prajnaparamita Sutra. He forgot the sutra. He couldn't remember the whole sutra. You know, the Heart Sutra. He performed the ceremony anyway, and they got married by Suzuki Roshi. Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. And he he was even when he wrote this, he was close with John Coonan because John Coonan was living up there in Northern California, not away from him. Another story, I think John Coonan told me this one too. It's an old one. When you go into Sokoji, there was a long row of steps. You had to go up to the office and upstairs. There were these two Zen students. I think they were at the top of the stairs. They were discussing whether Suzuki Roshi was perfect or not. Oh, that's great. They decided to leave it at that. They didn't resolve it. One was walking down and one was walking up the steps. Suzuki Roshi happened to come in right at that moment. And when he was right in the middle of the stairs, and one student was at the bottom and the other was at the top, he dropped his stick, his baton, right there in the middle. There's a good koan as to was Suzuki Roshi perfect or not? When we were having meals and we had enough food, we'd raise our hand. Flat out in the early days, we didn't do it just flat out. Right, you put your like if you're being served in your bowls and you don't want any more, you put your hand out with the palm up and usually make a little motion with it. That means, no, I've had enough. And then there was another form, which I think was more like done at Eiheiji. You just use two fingers forward to go, I've had enough. So we did it like the Boy Scout motto. Oh, but we didn't do it flat out right. There were two ways. We did it like the Boy Scout motto with our thumb over our pinky and, over the pinky and the fourth finger, with them on the palm and the thumb over them. Somehow we got into that trip. Suzuki Roshi just went along with it. No, Leland. Kobun taught us that. It's the way they did it at Eiheiji. I was there doing it like a Boy Scout until we were told to change it. Yeah, it's because there were different forms. Like different temples would have different traditions. One would be to have the whole hand open. The other would be just use two fingers. And, I've been with monks in Japan who would talk about these like tiny details different between the way their temple did it and Eiheiji did it. And they said, we do it the traditional way, the way Dogen did it or something. They've lost the true way of, these just like little ceremonial differences. So then he says, Tassajara 71 and 72, I worked in the kitchen and had my own schedule. It was very comfortable. Actually, I had time off when nobody else did in the afternoons. There was a book of Suzuki Roshi talks. I used to go up on this hill behind Tassajara where there was sun, and I'd strip down totally naked. I could take off all my clothes and be warmed by the sun until it set. Then it got very cold. I'd sit up there and read this book. It was a wonderful booklet of his talks. They were revolutionary. He'd talk about money, about everyday life. He talked about money as being a very cleansing thing, about how money could actually cleanse the world. Oh, what an interesting idea. You don't see those kind of talks around anymore. They were really different from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and their content. And I have a little note there. See shunryusuzuki.com. I remember, because they're all there. Everything that survived. And Leland says, I remember being in another long session, probably 70. Suzuki Roshi came in and said, oh, I'm so ashamed. He kept saying it. I can't remember if this was a different time or the same time, but I remember another time he came around and hit everybody really hard with a stick. I've heard that shame and grateful in Japan are the same word. No, that's not true, Leland. Well, I don't know what that would be. Shame and grateful? Nah. I'm sure Suzuki Roshi was grateful. Of course, we all took it literally. We were all wondering what he was ashamed about. It was a very intense burst of, wait a minute. Once he was ashamed because he'd broken a bowl. And once he was ashamed because he felt like he'd gotten too angry. But, you know, it was his way of confessing and apologizing, and he wouldn't hang on to it, and then it would be gone and he'd forget it. And I admired that. It's a very hard thing to do. Very hard for me to really apologize, to say, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong, or I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed about something, I wasn't careful with this, or whatever. He was really good at that. But, you know, growing up in Japan, being Japanese is a good training for that. And he really took it to heart. And considering that he was a Zen teacher, he really took the low ground a lot. It's like in the book of Tao, it says, you know, something like, you know, a person of the Tao is like water. In fact, Alan Watts wrote a book on the Tao. Wasn't it him? Called it the Watercourse Way. You go to the lowest spot. He was very good at that. I really admired that. So Leland concludes by saying, it was a very intense burst of energy when he did come around with the stick. He had everybody. And there were a lot of people in those sessions. He must have had to hit 60 people or so with his stick. That's called Rensaku. That's traditional. You go around and hit everybody. He'd hit, you know, bang, bang on the right, bang, bang on the left. He hit everybody. It's to encourage people, get them to wake up, that sort of thing. Every once in a while, very rarely, but it would happen. He'd get into like some fierce thing, you know, talking. It might be just start talking spontaneously in Zazen. There'd be something, you know, some point he wanted to make strongly or something that was really bugging him. And then he'd just jump off the tan where he was sitting, the raised platform, go around and hit everybody. That would be one way. Another, so that one had a sort of like fierce energy. But another way, there wouldn't be anything like that. He'd just boing, hop off the ton ground and hit everybody. Like, not a lot at all, but it happened. And it's traditional. Well, look, this has gone on a long time. That is a great, I said letter. It looks to me like it was an interview, but I don't really know. It's a long time ago. It was 21 years ago. So, God, I want to get hold of him. God, I remember that about him is Ken Berman. He was always so honest and straightforward. And he didn't like things to be too fancy. And he did do what he said when he was young. He did live in a more remote place up north and, you know, have his own little cabin that he'd put a lot of time into working on and stuff like that. I wonder where he is now. Maybe Dennis Sampson knows. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining us. This has taken a while. I am not going to go over this. I am not going to go over this audio. I don't think there are any coughs in it. You know, I paused it once to cough. And I read this because I didn't have a guest. But there's so many things like this on Cuke.com that I think are worth putting into a podcast too. I mean, I really enjoy doing this. And pardon me if I made too many comments. But that's sort of the way I do things a lot. So thanks a lot for joining us. And until next time, this is DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.